Yeah, I just want to look at the prospects for what we want to do in terms of vegan education. And also want to look at some of the controversies that are going on in the movement. Now, the reason for that is that Roddy Lee will be here this afternoon and he's going to do a workshop. So I'm kind of setting some themes which might or might not appear in the workshop a little later on. So this is me. I've been around for quite a while. I tried to get involved with the movement in 1977 when I was living in Scunthorpe, and I tried to get involved with the Saboteurs at that time. Didn't manage until 79, and I was lucky because I went vegan pretty quick, in about 3 months. And I've always been very grateful that I never got kind of, if you like, stuck in the vegetarian phase, you know. A lot of people say at the moment now, I wish I knew about veganism earlier, this kind of stuff, you know. I've been vegetarian for many years, and it's a really kind of common thing. And I know somebody who's kind of been stuck, if you like, in vegetarianism for about 50 years, you know, she regrets it, you know. So I've always been very grateful that I managed to avoid that. And I think it's because I got involved with that activism pretty quickly. I was part of the Sea Shepherd crew on the Orkneys. BYV, Pursuit of the Abolition of Vivisection, and I'm a committee member of that. And then I found lots of these action groups, Thur Action Group, Hazelton Action Group, things like this, Emerson Action Group in Manchester, the Thur thing. And then also in Manchester there was the Northern Animal Liberation League, which did a kind of like daylight rescues, if you like. But also, this was before the age of the internet. It was a question of taking a big group of people inside a place. Very educational for the people who went, in the sense that if you yourself go into a battery unit, you'll never forget the experience. And also, it means that no matter what the farmers say subsequently, you've seen the truth, you've smelt it, you've experienced it, you know. So whether they say they love their animals and all the rest of the stuff that comes out, you know the truth. And then for a short period, I was the Northern Press Officer for the ALF, the Animal Liberation Front Supporters Group. At present, I'm in Dublin. I'm working for this, the Vegan Information Project. So my title then is about this prospects and controversies, but it's going to be split into 2 parts really. I want to talk a little bit about the VIP, and then introduce these wider issues which Ronnie will build on a little later on. In relation to the Vegan Information Project, this is something new, brand new in Ireland, and I describe it as mould breaking, in the sense that we wanted to do something bigger than ever occurred hitherto. And so outreach on the streets in Ireland had traditionally been the pasting table, leaflets on top, maybe a banner around, or demonstrations, that kind of thing outside fur shops, and this kind of thing. We wanted to do something different, so this is a gazebo stall, which is 3 meters by 3 meters, so it's kind of like half of this room, you know, really in that sense. And we brought lots of elements together which normally exist separately. So obviously you have vegan-based, animal rights-based literature as usual, but also we have the pay-to-view thing. Now, the pay-to-view in North America is usually the idea that you give somebody $1 and they watch a film clip for about 4 minutes. And usually that's very graphic material. So we decided to kind of break the mold as well on that. For example, we will pay them with a cupcake or a cup of tea, and they can choose what they want to watch. And so some of it is not graphic. But also, we've got something called the tea station, which is like a cafe area within the gazebo. And so people can watch a bit of film and then sit down with the vegans and ask them questions about what they've just seen. So we find that all these elements work really well. We give food samples out on the street, and that brings people to the gazebo stall. And then we've also got the portions of the food that they've tried for sale. And we've also got a range of goods like the ones out at the moment in the main hall. So the reaction to this groundbreaking kind of work has been pretty good. And one thing we noticed is that one benefit is the week-on-week thing, the fact that we're there every week. We've been in a famous area of Dublin called Temple Bar, and we've been there now for 13 weeks. It's our 14th week this Wednesday coming. And there was one case where one of the volunteers noticed that a woman came along and she kind of was looking at the stall, a bit interested. She came along the second week, looking again, and it wasn't until the third week that she had enough courage, if you like, to ask a question. You know, so we found that's pretty good in that sense. We got a lovely Facebook communication where somebody said that they'd seen the stall 3 weeks previously. They were vegan already, but they were a bit wobbly, and the fact that the stall was there had given them some resolve, some strength to carry on being vegan. Because, as we know, I always say this, you know, the problem, if you like, about veganism is not health, it's not nutrition. The problem is social. You know, if people have problems about veganism, it's usually their social life, their family life. A lot of people get very upset and distressed because they can't make inroads with their family. Now, I'm a sociologist. I can tell you that some of the hardest people to talk to in a physical sense or in a social sense is your own family. Because when you talk to family members, there's a lot of family baggage and everything that goes along. It's not the same as if you're on the street talking to a stranger. You know. So if you're in that situation where you're talking to your family, they're not receptive. It's not your fault. It's a sociological issue, you know, in the sense that you might actually be the worst person for them to talk to in an ironic kind of way. Obviously, in other ways, it works, and the entire families obviously have become vegan as well. The cafe area has been quite good in the sense that often when we give leaflets out, and some people have been giving leaflets out for years and years and years, you're not quite sure what happens to them. In fact, sometimes you are sure because you find them in the bins later or on the streets, you know, and that's a regular thing. But what we find is that people will accept a free cup of tea, and they've got their little bundle of leaflets, and they'll sit and read them there and then talk to us about it, you know. So again, the experience has been different, you know, in that sense. Now, Dublin is an interesting capital city in the sense that there's no vegan restaurant. In fact, there's a vegan restaurant that's just opened about 2 weeks ago, the very first one. Disappointingly, I noticed about 3 or 4 days ago they've got a sign saying it's a vegetarian restaurant, but apparently the menu is vegan, apparently, but they call themselves vegetarian. So we get a lot of people coming up asking us, are there any vegan-friendly restaurants? And there are a number of those in Dublin. So we've produced a special map, and so we can show them where to go. So a lot of tourists come, and people who don't know, or even people from Ireland that not that familiar with Dublin will come, and we'll show them the map. The great thing about that is that if they've got a map, we give them, because it's a photocopy, we give them the map, they know where to go, and that means that they're not tempted then to just go to any old place, and then they're going to go to the vegan-friendly places, which is quite useful. We also tell them what to expect in terms of the food. This is generally Indian or something else, and also in terms of the prices. And then finally on this, a lot of people keep coming up to the stall and just saying things like, I want to thank you for what you do, or we want to thank you just for being here, which is a great thing. I think that some people are just so pleased to see this kind of outreach on the street. They're kind of getting it in the sense that they can understand that this is a good way of reaching people. Now, in terms of the problems, if you wanted to consider doing this kind of thing, is permission. That's always the problem. So we had to do a lot of negotiation to be able to cite the stall where it was, because it's not a question of just setting up with a pasting table. So that's usually the problem. So it needs you to go to a council, you need to do some negotiation. It might mean things like you have to get insurance. We've got insurance to the value of 6.5 million euro, which is a requirement. In fact, if we had a staff member, we would have to have insurance to the value of 23 million euro, for health and safety matters. So, if somebody takes a food portion and then kind of ends up in hospital or something, you've got to be insured. Or if somebody just trips over the thing, you've got to be insured. So that is kind of an issue. one negative thing which ended up being weirdly positive was that a burger bar, we were situated in front of a burger bar in Temple Bar, and they complained to the Temple Bar Trust, who gave us the contract to be there, and they said that our being there was putting their customers off eating meat. Yeah? And we said, but we don't have any graphic pictures on the store, which we don't. The only graphic thing they will see is in the video booths if they volunteer to actually look in there, so you don't see anything graphic. So that was interesting in itself, and it goes back to the kind of thing that Carol Adams would say, kind of eco-feminist kind of point, the absent referent, that we were reminding people about what that was on their plate. You know, and so that was quite interesting. So some of the customers apparently objected to it. Then the weird thing was that McDonald's opened next door to us, so we got a huge kind of stairs for that. But when we went back to renegotiate our contract, the good thing was that the burger bar was complaining about McDonald's by then and not vegan. So in some weird way, probably the first time ever, McDonald's had taken the heat off the vegans. You know, so that was quite good. So it's been a great experiment. We said it was an experiment when we tried an ambitious thing to do. We also said it won't really come into its own until 2014, when we finally got all the elements together, up and running properly and working. What we're finding, though, that people are not scared of the word vegan. This is a movement issue. You can see there it's got Vegan Information Day, it's got Vegan Information Project, it's got Why Vegan signs all over it. We're not hiding the fact. We're not kind of going, you know, this is the Save the Dolphins thing, and by the way, we're a vegan store. We're saying this is a vegan store. People are coming up to it, and they're not going, what's all this then? I've never heard of this. They're usually saying things like, tell me more, I'm interested in it. So in that sense, even in Ireland, when I first got to Ireland, I was told that Ireland wasn't ready for veganism. But even in Ireland, people seem to be vegan curious, you know. So I would say, from a movement point of view, it's not a problem to be outwardly, openly, boldly, you know, unequivocally vegan. That's not a problem. People are asking intelligent questions of us. They're not arguing with us. They're coming asking some really interesting kind of questions. So this brings us then to the second part, really, which is the movement issues, because there is a kind of slide away from veganism within the movement, and it's been led by people like Nick Cooney, it's been led by people like Melanie Joy, and there's quite a few people who are attached to or associated with international kind of groups, and they would prefer to talk about veggie or veg, you know, and they still regard vegan as some kind of scare word within the movement, as though it's going to put people off, you know. And then this horrible word that I really slap myself, which is vegan, V-E-G*N, you know, which seems to suggest that vegetarian and veganism is the same. And of course, the philosophies of the two things are different, you know. Now, it's incumbent on vegans to critique vegetarianism, but not to attack vegetarians. That's very important. We need to critique vegetarianism because it's just another form of animal use. But we've got to do it in a way that doesn't seem to attack individual vegetarians, because individual vegetarians think that they're doing a lot of good for animals. And, you know, it's when they become vegan when they say, I never realised, I didn't realise the truth about eggs, I didn't realise the truth about dairy. You hear these stories over and over again, you know, that people say, well, meat eaters are ignorant. Well, vegetarians are ignorant of that. I'm not saying vegetarians are ignorant, but they're ignorant of the things that they're still consuming. They don't quite understand it, you know. So we need to do some education within the movement as well, and, you know, outreach towards vegetarians. So these are the kind of issues that Ronnie here will might at least bring up a little later on. And, you know, I'm a university lecturer, so it's kind of one-way traffic with me. I talk at you, you listen, that's the deal. Whereas with the workshop, it's going to be much more interactive, yeah? So what social movement theory tells us, some of the things that I've taught and researched, what happens when a movement becomes more mainstream? And to some degree, veganism is becoming a bit more mainstream now. And what tends to happen when a movement becomes more mainstream is there's a pressure to moderate. There's a whole history of social movement theory which suggests that, you know, and the classic case would be something like Greenpeace International, not to be confused with Greenpeace London, the anarchist group. With Greenpeace International, you know, very kind of radical at the beginning, saving the world and all the rest of it, and now it's almost like a multinational bureaucracy. That's what tends to happen. Another example would be PETA, very radical at the time, and now it's just sexist rubbish, you know. So something happens when people get involved and they become careerists, as I call them. I know it's a very negative term, but you know, I've got a problem personally about people who spend their entire lives getting wages, you know, this kind of stuff, especially if they're big wages. Don't mind people working for 90 hours for hardly anything, but you know, the idea that people are making a good living at animal rights, I have a problem with that. So, when a movement organisation gets bigger, it tends to lose its radical edge. It becomes more moderate. And the reason for that is that more people join, and different people got different ideas about what's going on. And so people have a different idea about the movement's aims, and people have a different idea about the movement's aspirations. This is what happens, you know, and this is the history of social movements. Social movements become split, and they have done throughout history because of that. Some theorists of social movements, they talk about goal displacement. What happens then is that your initial core idea somehow gets lost, you know, and it gets replaced by something else. And the classic example given in the literature is that people who want to change the world, you know, kind of, let's do it, but they end up kind of like running jungle sales and you know, tombolas and stuff like that, you know. So there is a problem with goal displacement, you know, in the sense that you can take your eye off the ball. And if your interest suddenly becomes keeping your little business or industry or corporation going, then you're kind of taking your eye off the ball a little bit. It can happen when a group professionalizes, whatever that means, you know, and certainly when a lot of people start getting paid, you know, especially when you're getting paid in these groups that all duplicate each other. I mean, if you look, I was very critical of the anti-vivisection groups in the 1980s, and at the time there was about 5 in Britain. It might even be more now, all duplicating each other's work. You know, if you took the logo off them, the leaflets are virtually the same. You know, so there's a lot of duplication, which means a lot of wasted money in this movement. Okay, yeah, let's move this little thing a bit. Other movements that can come into trouble, or social movements can come into trouble when people start to redefine things. Now, this is what's happening within the vegan movement. People are starting to redefine what veganism means. Now, there's always been issues about definitions with veganism. In the 1980s, the Vegan Society, the British Vegan Society, they kind of allowed people to consume honey. It was left to individual conscience, and then that lasted for kind of about a decade. So there's always been definitional disputes. At the moment, we've got a lot of things going on. Some people, for example, are suggesting that a phrase like lacto-vegan could become a phrase where vegans consume cow milk sometimes. Other people are talking about mostly vegan. There's a lot of talk about that on Facebook right now. I mean, Eric Marcus was saying that, you know. Questions about can vegans eat oysters, because oysters might not be essential, an issue. Can they ride on the backs of horses? You know, these are questions that are actually being asked at the moment. There's always questions about rescued hens' eggs. If you rescue, you know, spent hens, as it were, and then they lay, what's the problem? Now, you know, from a pure animal rights point of view, the problem is property. Those eggs are the property of the hens who laid them, you know, and they will make use of them or not, but that's up to them. You know, they're not ours. That will be the answer to that one. So, somebody suggested, I don't know, a couple of years ago now, that roadkill might be vegan. Okay? And that you could even approach the dead body of a deer and cut so-called venison from that body and still be regarded as a vegan. Okay? So there are a lot of people doing this thing. Now, in some senses, this is a sign of success, because a lot more people are getting involved in the movement. That means that you do get this questioning about what we stand for, what our aims are, where we're going, and so forth. That brings us to the divisive issue of politics. And the question being asked at the moment is, are we a political movement or are we apolitical? And there's some real serious ramifications here. Anybody who might know me from Facebook will know that I've been kind of pushing a recent Steve Best video called Total Liberation. Now, anybody who knows me also will know that Steve Best and I don't really get on. We all have names and all this bit. And, but his analysis has always been good and very sociological. His solution has often been rather crass and everything. But on this occasion, it's quite interesting. He's suggesting that we, and this was only put about a month ago in Luxembourg, so if you put Steve Best, Total Liberation in YouTube, you'll find it. He's arguing that we, whether we like it or not, are a left-wing movement. Very controversial claim, difficult, because the demographics of the movement don't support that claim. The demographics suggest that we're white, bourgeois, middle-class movement, right? He says we're a left movement. He said, I can prove it. We've got left values. Our values are of the left. Our value heritage is from the left. If we look at our values, these are left values, such as rights, democracy, anti-discrimination, anti-hierarchy, cooperation, non-violence. As he even said, that will become, a joke for him to say that. The values of the right are things like war, family, nations, borders. Okay, these are the values that we don't tend to share. There was some research by a guy called Ronald Engelhardt, and he was talking about materialist values and post-materialist values. Very similar idea. If you're about material values, it's about me getting stuff for you. If we're past all that, you tend to give a lot of your wealth away. And Tom Reagan would say that if you look at the movement, you'll see that most people are in the service sector, not the private sector. So most people in the movement, if you look, are nurses and teachers and doctors and people in caring professions. So there is an issue that where are our values and what does that mean? It raises that question, which is rife in the movement at the moment, is do we just welcome anybody into the movement? If you're a racist, welcome. If you're a sexist, welcome. If you're fascist, welcome. This is a trend at the moment in the movement. It matters not, we're told, that people are racist. It matters not if they're sexist or even fascist. So these are issues. The animals, they say, don't care who rescues them. They just want to be rescued, which is true. But those statements are taking place within the context of a social movement who needs to move on. We need to make progress. And the progress is in terms of alliance politics. Again, this is Steve Best. And that means that we need to align ourselves with the people with the same values as us. At the moment, he says, the left hate us because they look at us and they see sexism and they see racism and they see fascism and they won't have anything to do with us. He says the left's critique of us is true, just as our critique of them, which is they're all speciesists, is also true. So the only way that we can work together, which is necessary, is for us to sort our kind of mess out, our value mess itself out, and then we can engage in alliance politics. That's the issue. And maybe we can come back to that with Ronnie's session. Maybe that will come. Final thing I want to say is about single issues. Me and Ronnie both agree that when we were active in the 1980s, most of the people I knew were vegans, and yet we didn't campaign for veganism. We campaigned against fur, we campaigned against blood sports, and we kept all these things separate, as though they were in different compartments or something. You go on the media, and you talk about the single issue that you're dealing with, and people will still do that. There are still people in Dublin who will still do that. There are other people now who are contextualising this thing, and saying that the problem, the deep problem, is cultural speciesism. And that's why these things manifest themselves. You know, the reason that people go hunting is because they're speciesists. You know, the reason that people wear fur coats is because they devalue the lives of their animals. They're human supremacists and all the rest of it. So that is the overarching framework, you know. Again, go back to Melanie Joy, she's trying to kind of feed everybody into this issue of carnism. Now, under pressure, she'll admit that carnism is a subset, a sub-ideology of speciesism. Yeah? But she doesn't talk about that because, you know, she wants to make her name in carnism. But the point is, the real issue is speciesism. You know? She says the opposite of carnism is veganism. But the opposite of carnism really is vegetarianism. The opposite of speciesism is veganism. You know? So we need to sort ourselves out in these senses. More and more people now are claiming that veganism is the moral baseline of the animal rights movement. If you regard animals as rights holders, if you think that what happens to them systematically, routinely, wherever it happens, are rights violations, then naturally you're gonna be aligned with veganism. It's just a kind of natural thing. So the idea now is that we've got a moral baseline, and it is veganism. Now that doesn't mean that you slag off people who are not vegans, and it doesn't also mean that you expect them to go vegan overnight, because everybody accepts that change is incremental. But rather than now saying, go vegetarian first, which has been a tradition, people are now saying, be as vegan as possible. So that's a shift in our claims making. You know, social movements, the social movement theorists, are claims makers in civil society. You know, and so that's a shift in our claims. We're now not saying go vegetarian and then go vegan. We're saying be as vegan as possible. You know, and that has kind of changed a little thing. And so, you know, it's a bit weird, really. I found from Ireland, looking at the badger cull issue as a spectator, if you like. It's really odd that that single issue has really kind of come on so strong again. You know. And what's worrying within the context of this talk for me is the fact that you've now got vegans saying, don't talk too much about veganism. You're going to cut the meat eaters off. You know, who are also against badger cull. You know, the weirdest thing. I mean, you can almost make that point if you're outside a circus or a fur shop. But the badger cull connected to the dairy industry, connected to veganism. I mean, it doesn't make any sense to start with. That's the one place where you should contextualize veganism. You know, I mean, I would say do it everywhere. You know, abolitionize single issues. But with the badger cull, that's a perfect opportunity to talk about veganism. You know, like, we don't need to shout at people, but to talk about the context of it. Well, you know, what is the reason for the badger cull? Well, it's said it's about the dairy industry. Other people would say it might be a lot of other things, you know, politics or everything else. But it's claimed to be about the dairy industry. Well, you know, vegans have got something to say about that. This is not the time not to talk about veganism at all. This is the time, going back to the VIP, this is the time for a bit of boldness, you know. We've got a vegan movement now which is not scared of itself. Let's not back off now. Let's not do no knee joint and slide back to vegetarian. Let's not do that. Let's not go from speciesism back to carnism. Let's continue keeping veganism as the moral baseline of the animal rights movement where it belongs and where it fits perfectly in terms of philosophical consistency. You know, and that's what we need to do. And that's where I think.